Hey everyone, Joe Mazzalotti here. Today we're going to talk about setting up Cedar in Xcode 6. Cedar is an open source behavior-driven development framework for Objective-C written by Pivotal Labs. There's a link in the description of this video if you need to check it out. Normally the install is just done via CocoaPods, but there's also some minor fiddling with XCTest if you want to get it to run nicely in Xcode 6, so I'll walk through that today. So the first thing we're going to do is open up Xcode and create a brand new project. We'll call this just Cedar example and use my website as the organization name. So once we do that, we can put it inside of our, let's say we have our YouTube folder and we have a setting up Cedar directory. So once we have that there, we can run our tests with Command U. There's a standard testing suite that I believe it's using XCTest that Xcode gives us for free now. And we'll see that that gives us a couple passing examples. So we have two tests there with 0 failures. And where these are coming from are the Cedar example tests M file right here. So there's a setup, teardown, test example, and a performance example. You'll see that they inherit from XCTest case. So we actually aren't going to use XC directly, we're going to use Cedar, so let's delete those. Move them to the trash, and open up our our terminal here. So we have our Cedar example, and what we're going to do is initialize a pod file. And what this does is create a nice little pod file with just some empty targets in there. So let's edit that. And for our example tests, our tests, let's add the Cedar pod, standard CocoaPods behavior here. Once we do that, we can install it. So this is now going to download the Cedar source, or a Cedar CocoaPod to our machine in this directory, and we'll create all of our XC configs so we can get that working in our project. Now with CocoaPods you can't use the project anymore, we need to use the workspace. So let's close that and open up the Cedar example XC workspace. Bring that in full screen. And now we have our example and our pods. So now let's add a Cedar test. So we have our example tests right here. Let's add a new file to them. A Cedar spec, and we'll just call the app delegate. Nothing really matters here, we just need to get a test to run. We're not in the right directory here. Make sure we're in the right test example, sample tests. So now that we have that, we want to make sure that we import the right things. So this is just importing our header for Cedar, getting all of our matchers and our doubles set up. And here we're going to create an app delegate and just assert that it actually works. So a simple one, it should exist. Subject should not be nil. And let's run those with Command U and see what happens here. Now normally in Xcode 5 this would work no problem. But starting with Xcode 6, Cedar requires a little bit more work on our part, and we'll see what our failure is in a second once this compiles. So what we're getting here is that there's no test framework available. We must either link against XCTest or SenTestingKit. So what we can do here is create a nice little shim in our test to link against XCTest. So in our supporting files, let's create a new file. Just a standard CocoaTouch class, and we'll call it XCTest importer. Make sure we add it to our target, our test target. And here we actually don't need the H file. We can get rid of that, delete it. But in our implementation, what we want to do is redeclare that class, or that interface. for the XCTest importer. What we're going to do here is instead of inheriting from an S object, we're going to inherit from anything in the XCTest framework. So here XCTest exception I know works pretty well. But the only way to import XCTest is via an @import. Can't import it any other way. So we now have that. We have ender file. Let's try to run this. Well, if I spelled it correctly. XCTest. Sorry, not expectation. Expectation. Let's run that again. So there we go, one passing test with just a couple lines of code. Now what's actually going on here is the import is what's allowing us to get that compile time typing of the XCTest expectation. But what's really happening is that when we declare this implementation of a subclass, is that the linker is wiring us up to XCTest. Now, why couldn't we do it the standard way of adding in a build setting over here, a build phase, and linking it over here? Well, unfortunately, you won't be able to find XCTest in here. You won't be able to find any testing framework in here except the old one, SenTesting. And yeah, you could link against SenTesting, no problem. But the nice thing about XCTest is that we get all of our tests that are passing and failing over in this little test window. We can also run them again by clicking that little icon. So a little bit of improvement for Xcode 6. We might as well take advantage of it. That's all I have for now, and next time we'll be looking into how to use Cedar to test a little bit more of our UI kit.